All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for Norman Rockwell, Inclusion, Exclusion, and Evolving Views on Race. This is, I think, an informative and entertaining program, and I'm honored that you're spending your evening with me to learn a little bit more about Norman Rockwell and his paintings. My name is Jane Oneail. I own Culturally Curious, which is an arts education consulting firm which specializes in art appreciation programs like this one. And I have to say, this is my favorite program to present because the material is really near and dear to my heart. Quick introduction in terms of who I am and my background. I have a master's degree in art history from Boston University and a master's degree in education, arts education from Harvard University. And I sort of come to the art world as somebody who loves to facilitate conversations and to share that experience with groups. And of course, the Zoom format isn't necessarily the perfect vehicle for that. But what I've done here for you tonight is I think, curate a really sort of interesting set of images for us to reflect on. So throughout the program, feel free to use the chat function or the question and answer function, and I'll do my best at the end to go through those questions and answer them to the best of my ability. So let's dive right in. We have this really striking image on the screen, and it's sort of the highlight, the most important image for this program, but we are not going to dive right into this image first. What I'd like to do is work our way up to it, and I wanted to start off by giving a brief introduction to Norman Rockwell. I have a feeling that if you're here tonight with us, you probably already have a sense in terms of who he is, but I just spoke with someone the other day whose face went blank when I mentioned Norman Rockwell, so I'm not going to assume any prior knowledge. He was born at the end of the 19th century, and he died at the end of the 1970s. He is generally known as America's most beloved illustrator. I think many people would go even further and say he's America's most beloved artist. He would call himself an illustrator. That's a whole other issue. But he was formally trained as an artist, and he painted in oils. And for our purposes tonight, it's really important to know that he worked as a commercial artist. He had nearly a half-century career with the Saturday Evening Post, among other publications. So it's really the Saturday Evening Post that helps to launch and define him as an artist, and I think makes him a household name in many ways. So we have this idea of Norman Rockwell, who is as an artist who's able to sort of reflect and help to define American culture. And I think for many people, they associate him with being distinctly American or maybe even patriotic. He had a long relationship with the Boy Scouts of America. He painted several United States presidents on both sides of the aisle, and he even earned or was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom at the end of his career. So he's an artist that is tied into our national identity in such important ways. And I think it's really interesting to sort of delve into this aspect of his career. And of course, we see him here in a photograph as a rather young man in his studio, probably in the 1940s, because we see some images from the Four Freedoms behind him. And what I thought we'd do is start off with this image here. In a perfect world, we could have a really rich discussion about this image, but I'm going to sort of walk you through understanding this picture here. And it's an odd picture to start off with when we're talking about Norman Rockwell and race, but here we have Norman Rockwell showing us that he's really interested in the justice system, because we are, of course, in a jury room. You can see above the door here, there's the transom window, and written backwards is jury room. So we're seeing a jury deep in a debate. They've been there for a long time. There's crumpled paper on the floor. There's smoke hanging in the air. And almost everyone seems sort of frustrated and trying to sway this young woman who sits at the end of the table with her arms crossed. And she looks like she has made up her mind, regardless of how many people are leaning in towards her or gesturing in her face. Of course, this young man over here on the right seems pretty checked out. If it was painted today, there's no doubt he'd be on his cell phone, right? Norman Rockwell even painted himself into this picture. He's hanging over this woman's head, sort of imposing on her space. So this isn't just a picture about the justice system. In this case, Norman Rockwell was making a statement about social justice, because when this was painted in 1959, across the United States, there were several states still that did not allow women to serve on their juries. And so Norman Rockwell is using that sort of familiar narrative of 12 angry men and the idea that one holdout can really change a whole case. It can transform the life of the person on trial. And here he's saying that women can serve that very, very important role. So in the 1950s, we already see him kind of advocating for change in American culture, and we don't often think of Norman Rockwell in those terms. So let me give you the lay of the land in terms of how we'll move through the material tonight. The program will be about an hour, and I'm going to sort of very quickly move through these first two categories to show all of us, to get us all on the same page with the fact that Norman Rockwell had an incredible talent for making us all feel like we were a part of the American dream, that we were part of the middle class dream of America. And at the same time, he could create these very compelling images about being alone, about feeling isolated. So we'll move through a couple of examples in both of those categories. And then we'll turn our attention to the subject of race and the Saturday Evening Post. And then we'll look at how Norman Rockwell's work specifically evolves within the rules of the Saturday Evening Post, and then beyond that too. All right, this is another image here that we will get to and look at a little bit more in depth. So let's start off with inclusion, this idea of the American dream. So I think Norman Rockwell, I would argue that Norman Rockwell had an incredible talent for creating images that could resonate with a vast number of people immediately. And he had a talent for telling stories where we could identify with maybe one, if not more, of the characters that he depicted. So in this picture here, which is called Going and Coming from 1947, we see a middle class American family heading off to the beach for the day. And we see the boat strapped to the top of the car with an umbrella. And on the top, they're going. We can see everybody is full of enthusiasm. And there's, hijinks ensuing in the car with bad smells and this little boy leaning out. And then heading home, everybody's exhausted. Mom's already asleep. Dad's slouched over. The little girl's bubble is practically about to burst. And then Norman Rockwell always likes to include a little joke, and we see that grandma is absolutely unchanged from top to bottom. And so he gives us a character. He gives everybody a character in this picture to identify with, whether you're the parent or you remember being that child or you identify with the grandparent here. And we're all identifying with this idea of like, oh, we have the leisure time to do this. This is what happens when we go off on adventures with our family. And in this next image, we get the same sort of idea. This is an Easter cover from 1959. But this is, I would say, more of a picture about family dynamics. And I think Norman Rockwell has incredible insight into family dynamics in this picture, because of course we have a family of five here, and mom and the two girls and the young boy are dressed for church, and they're dutifully marching through the living room, heading off for an Easter service. And dad is playing hooky, and he feels bad about it. He's trying to get away with it by slouching down in his chair. But of course, it's not like he's invisible. He's in a debris field of newspapers. And of course, they know he's there. Even his young son is looking over at him. Norman Rockwell even gave the dad little devil horns with his hair sticking up like this. So, of course, I think most families have experienced at least one family member trying to get out of some sort of family or social or religious obligation in the exact same way. And so this picture sort of speaks to those family dynamics that we've all probably experienced at one point or another. But for the most part, Norman Rockwell is able to show family dynamics in sort of the best possible light. And he had a particular talent for showing homecomings. What we're looking at here is the Christmas cover for the Saturday Evening Post in 1948. This was the last Christmas cover that he did for them. And you'll notice there's hardly any real representation of Christmas here. We've got a few wrapped packages and a reference to the tree in the upper right. But otherwise, this is really about those family dynamics. We have a young man who has traveled and has returned home, perhaps from college or the big city. And we see the look of delight on every family member's face as he comes home. And we can practically feel that hug from his mother. I think that this is so powerful. And then again, Norman Rockwell gives us a little something to giggle about, because in this young man's suitcase, we can see there's kind of laundry almost spilling out. So I have no doubt that he has brought home his dirty laundry, as most young people do when they come home to visit. So again, there's something here. There's literally a character here for every one of us to identify with, whether you're the parent or you feel that hug from your mother as you're looking at this picture. And the ultimate picture, I think, that is about that American dream, that sense of something that we as Americans can sort of uniquely connect with, is this picture here, which is called The Freedom from Want, as part of Norman Rockwell's For Freedom series. But I think most Americans sort of think of this as the ultimate depiction of Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas dinner. I think at this point it's been sort of lost on many of us that this is a picture about freedom, because the focus certainly seems to be about food. But if you look a little bit harder, you'll notice that virtually everyone at the table is looking at across the table at another family member. They're not even looking at this giant bird that's being placed upon the table. The setting here is this beautiful middle class home, pristine white tablecloth and curtains on the windows. This is a family gathering which we're all supposed to be imagining ourselves a part of. And Norman Rockwell even extends the table to us. Look at this figure in the bottom right. He's looking out at us. And so we feel like this is our Thanksgiving. If not the Thanksgiving we actually experience, it's the idea of kind of the perfect American Thanksgiving. And Norman Rockwell has such a powerful way of sort of saying, this is what freedom and prosperity and middle class America looks like. And it resonates in a powerful way. So let's turn our attention to how he handled the subject of loneliness and isolation, because what an amazing thing to be able to paint a picture that makes us feel like we're a part of something bigger, and then to make us feel to tap into these feelings of loneliness and even the shame that sort of goes along with loneliness. And oftentimes he'll do that by using a little bit of humor again. So what we're looking at here is a picture called Ticket Agent from 1937. And of course, the irony here is that we have a man who's selling tickets to others so that they can travel around the world and see all the sights and have adventures. And here he is literally stuck behind bars in this ticket booth. And then he's even next to a sign that says, "Are you bored? Travel." And who among us hasn't felt this way at some point, where you're sort of dying to break free? Maybe you're in what feels like a dead end job, or maybe you just feel trapped in some way. And so there's a little bit of humor here, but of course, something that's supposed to resonate in all of us. The next image I wanted to show you about loneliness and isolation, I think, is another masterwork, because what we're looking at here is an image about feeling alone in a crowd. And so this is Skiers on the Train from 1962. And it always reminds me of the movie White Christmas when I see this. There's all this excitement, all these people heading up to the mountains. They're all wearing red. There's warmth, there's energy, there's jokes happening. And then right at the heart of this is a man who clearly is not part of the fun and the hijinks. He's dressed in sort of black and gray and cooler tones. And you can tell that he feels invisible in this crowd, and that he feels like he doesn't belong. And who among us hasn't felt that way, alone in a crowd, unnoticed in a crowd? And as someone who doesn't ski, I've certainly felt this way amongst skiers before. But I think that there's a universal feeling that he's tapping into here. This next image about loneliness and isolation, I think, is another very powerful image. This one was actually for the cover of the magazine McCall's in 1964. And what we're looking at is a little girl who's sitting at the top of the staircase in her home. She's gotten up out of bed to look at a Christmas party that her parents are hosting. And down these stairs, you can see all of these adults in sort of the warmth of this crowded party where there's all these golden colors, and we're looking at it over the shoulder of this little girl, and we immediately take on her perspective. We feel like we are that child. We feel the longing to be a part of something that we're not the right age for, or not ready to be a part of, or just something that we can't be a part of. Norman Rockwell has again sort of used colors here to indicate that separation. The little girl's white pajamas are rendered with this kind of cool gray that really sets her off from those warm tones down in the party. Incidentally, I have a friend who's an events planner, and when she saw this picture, she's like, "This is how I feel every time I plan a wedding. The party's underway, and I'm the person who's just sort of sitting back alone, watching it all unfold." So the last image of loneliness and isolation I wanted to show you is, I think, another masterwork by Norman Rockwell, and this one's called The Soda Jerk from 1953. And what we see here is one of Norman Rockwell's sons who is modeling as a soda jerk, or yeah, like a waiter here. And we can see that he has been ignoring his duties. We've got dirty dishes right at the bottom of the picture. And then our eyes move up to the fact that he is involved in some pretty heavy flirting across the counter here with these girls who are dressed in primary colors. We've got the yellow, blue, and red back here. And then the counter curves around and brings our eye to this boy in the top left. And he's sipping on his milkshake, and he is watching everything unfold over here. And I think that boy makes this picture really something special. Because if it was just teenagers flirting at over milkshakes, it would have been maybe a little too saccharine, a little too idealized. But by including this boy over here, we're reminded of how it feels to be on the outside, particularly when you're a teenager, and it seems like other people are connecting, or falling in love so easily, or flirting so easily. To be on the outside and to watch that is a real position of loneliness. So here we have Norman Rockwell as sort of the great unifier, and then the great depictor of isolation, and that feeling of being on the outside. So why didn't he use these talents to sort of speak to the circumstances of people of different ethnicities, different races in America? Well, part of that has to do with the Saturday Evening Post, his primary employer for the better part of 5 decades. So in this case, I have this great image on the screen from 1941, where we can see a teenage girl, complete with her dirty saddle shoes, is holding up her Saturday Evening Post, and so the face of like a starlet is covering her face, and I think that's a good reminder that with so many publications, there's a sense of aspiration with these images that are on the cover. And for the Saturday Evening Post, they were certainly aspiring to be a national publication. Around the time of the 1940s and 50s, they had a national footing. They had a circulation of upwards of about 6 million, I believe. And so these cover images were really sort of carefully designed to appeal to as wide an audience as possible. They wanted to sell magazines, but they also wanted to deliver images that people could sort of delight over the course of a week until they bought their next magazine. So these covers are curiously devoid of race, and there are many other national magazines in the 1950s, 40s even, that featured African Americans on the cover. So we have, for instance, Time and Newsweek and Life magazine here. So why doesn't Norman Rockwell and the Saturday Evening Post take this up? So I have a quote here from Norman Rockwell, and it says, George Horace Lorimer, the Saturday Evening Post editor, who was a very liberal man, told me never to show colored people except as servants. And so this seems sort of like a casual quote, but this was actually pretty firm policy through the duration of Norman Rockwell's tenure with the Saturday Evening Post. And so what I'd like to do next is show you how um, that policy translated into visuals. And I'm going to do that by showing you first a couple of images that are not painted by Norman Rockwell. Several of them are painted by artists that were like his mentor. But just to give you a sense in terms of how a policy like that can translate into covers. In the 1930s, we see outright racist images like white men in blackface performing as minstrels. And we also see images that are perhaps a little bit more subtle, but of course, an image here where we see a Black man in the role of servant to a white woman, a starlet in a picture called End of Vacation, and she's sort of waving to her friends, and she carries a big bouquet of flowers as the Black man behind her is literally burdened with her every possession. In this image here, by an artist named J.C. Leyendecker, who was very much Norman Rockwell's mentor as a commercial artist, we see two children who have scaled a signpost to get a better view of a 4th of July parade. And the white boy is sort of seated on the top of the signpost, and he's waving his hat triumphantly as the parade marches by. And the Black boy hasn't quite made it to the top, looks like he's holding on for dear life, and is really afraid of falling. So he's looking down with fear in his eyes versus the triumphant white boy. And if you look more carefully, you can see that the Black boy's clothes are torn. And so there's a real difference in terms of socioeconomic status, and their status in society is literally being reinforced by this hierarchy created on the signpost. One of the images that is repeated often on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post is the stereotype of the Black mammy. And it comes up again and again. And there's a visual code for it. It's virtually always an overweight, a plump Black woman with a handkerchief on her head, an apron on, and then oftentimes a gingham dress. And in the image on the left here, we can see that she is telling a story to a white child who she works for. And then on the right, she is cleaning her own house. Um, Sometimes the artists of the Saturday Evening Post would use this visual vocabulary that they have for the Black mammy and transpose it onto a white woman to make her the butt of a joke. So in this case, in the 1937 cover, we have a white woman who's wearing the gingham dress, the handkerchief on her head. She's very plump, and she's surrounded by cleaning equipment and standing on a pedestal that says Queen of the May. So of course she's no beauty queen because she's visually coded to be something of derision. And for the most part, the artists of the Saturday Evening Post were painting middle-class women, even when they were in ridiculous circumstances, like we see on the right here from a 1950s cover. Even though her life is chaos, she's slender, she's elegant, she's still someone who's aspirational. But again and again, the mammy resurfaces, and again with the handkerchief, the gingham dress, the apron, and these images span the 1930s right up to the early 1940s. And I can't overstate enough how damaging it can be in a culture, in a society, if a person, if sort of a class of person is represented in one distinct way and is only seen in that one distinct way. And if mass media continues to reinforce this singular way of understanding this person. So of course, this wasn't just the cover of the Saturday Evening Post. It was in films like Gone with the Wind from 1939, and Hattie McDaniel's portrayal of the Black Mammy type in that picture. And then that extends all the way to today with the book and the movie The Help, which featured some of America's best Black actresses. But Viola Davis, who you see over here on the right, actually said she regretted playing the role in the movie because she said ultimately the voices of the maids were not heard. But of course, just the idea that in the in recent years, this is some of the best roles that great Black actresses can get. Sort of shows how corrosive a stereotype like that can be, and how it can certainly linger on. So let's shift our attention back to Norman Rockwell and sort of see how race plays a role in his career. So the very first image of a Black person that I could find in a Norman Rockwell painting is this one here. It's from the 1920s. And we're not looking at a cover of the Saturday Evening Post. What we're looking at here, believe it or not, is an advertisement, and you'll never believe what it's for. Floor varnish. What a strange setup for an ad for floor varnish. So we've got a little story here. We've got an itinerant musician who has come to the home of a middle-class white family and comes inside, helps to roll the carpet back, and as he's playing the banjo, the young boy sort of beats out a rhythm on this lovely varnished floor. so so it seems harmless enough. It seems like a nice sort of intergenerational connection here over the power of music. But Norman Rockwell is, even though this is a very sensitively rendered figure too, what he is doing here is he is building off of sort of a racial stereotype that had existed for more than a century before him. And so there was this stereotype of Black people, Black men in particular, playing the banjo, and that they had the sort of natural ability to play the banjo. So we see Currier and Ives prints from the 19th century, where on the left we see sort of happy slaves making music. On the right we see really sort of disparaging, racist imagery that's related to African Americans playing the banjo. Going back a century, you have this association with Black minstrels playing banjos, and then that extends into the 20th century with white performers in blackface, specifically using that same instrument. So you have Norman Rockwell kind of building off of this really um, long racist imagery, to be frank. And the one sort of exception to that rule is Henry Tanner's painting from 1893. So about a generation before Norman Rockwell's picture. And Henry Tanner's picture that we see over here was painted by a Black artist. So we can see that it's not just about sort of a natural ability. It's about, again, sort of an intergenerational lesson, passing down the wisdom, the understanding of this instrument from one generation to the next. So as time goes on, we see that Norman Rockwell's pictures certainly abide by the rule that is laid out by the Saturday Evening Post. And so we have a picture over here from the 1930s, 1934, called He Went That Way, where we have this lovely sort of upper class woman who's fallen off her horse. And then to add insult to her injury, it is a poor Black child who we only see from behind, who is telling her where her horse has run off to. Over here on the right, we have Full Treatment from 1940, where we see this sort of plump white businessman who is sort of delighted and looking right out at us as he's getting, sort of like a spa pampering. And one of the people who's tending to him, we can again only see from behind. And I think you have to kind of look hard to even notice that he is a Black man. And interestingly, Norman Rockwell has included the detail that he has holes in the bottom of his shoes. So in this next section, what I'd like to do is sort of show you how Norman Rockwell's views begin to evolve, and he begins to make really specific choices related to his new and sort of strongly held beliefs about race. And again, we will get to this image in just a moment. I'd like to start off this section with this quote, which I find really amazing. It says, "I was born a white Protestant with some prejudices, which I am continuously trying to eradicate." And I think this really closely aligns with what people would call being anti-racist today, working really hard to recognizing that there is some racism that's there, but working hard to be better and to understand and better and to make better choices. And so for Norman Rockwell, that meant he actually decided to estrange himself from his own brother because of his brother's opposing views when it came to race. And it also meant that he began to seek out opportunities outside of the Saturday Evening Post to paint a more diverse cast of characters. So he began illustrating pictures or illustrating stories from American Magazine in the 1930s. This is a painting that he made for a story called Love Wanga in 1936. And Love Wanga roughly means like love voodoo. And so this is sort of like a fish out of water scene where the fancy lady from the city has come to the country church and she's trying to find someone who can help her cast a voodoo love spell. But of course, she is being regarded as the real outsider here, while everybody kind of subtly and not so subtly sneaks a peek at her as she sort of infiltrates their church. And she's just painted it. She's a gorgeous figure. She's one of the most beautiful women Norman Rockwell's ever painted. Another story that he illustrated from American Magazine in 1940 is this one here called The Proud Possessor. And it's loosely, to just sum it up really quickly, it's about a white boy who gets these two puppies that he really wants to keep, but he can't. And so he asks the Black boy to take care of them for him. And here is the Black boy essentially saying, like, what are you going to do for me if I watch your dogs? So important to know is part of Norman Rockwell's process. He was an artist who very firmly felt that he could not make a painting unless he started with photography. So he had to have live models, and he would take anywhere from 50 to 100 photographs in order to capture the exact pose he was looking for. So models and photography are essential to his process. And at this point in his career, he is living in Vermont, which then and now is one of the whitest states in the country. So finding Black models or any sort of person of color who could model for him was a challenge in and of itself. So for him to seek out those opportunities really, to me, shows a real commitment. So of course, here we have the children modeling for that picture, and then a really detailed sketch over here on the left. So in the early 1940s, we have Norman Rockwell engaging with race in a new and sort of more committed way, and in a way that sort of shows that he's set to defy this policy from the Saturday Evening Post. And we see that in this series that's called The Four Freedoms, which I mentioned earlier. It's from 1943. It's inspired by Franklin Delano Roosevelt's State of the Union speech from 1941, where he talked about these four freedoms that are sort of essential to American life: the freedom of speech over here on the left, the freedom of religion, the freedom from want, and the freedom from fear. These are such high-minded ideals, and I love them. And I love that Norman Rockwell was so committed to painting them. But I want you to meditate on the fact just for a moment. Just imagine if someone handed you a pencil and a blank sheet of paper and said, "Draw me freedom from fear." What would that look like? That would be a challenge. And this was a challenge for Norman Rockwell, even though he was determined to do it. It took him, I think, somewhere around 7 to 9 months to paint, and he lost about 15 pounds in the process. But in the end, these images were all published in the Saturday Evening Post, and they were also part of a touring exhibition that helped to raise $132 million towards the war effort. So this is a really important series. And so here's a quick pop quiz for you. If I were to put you on the spot right now and say, which of these four images doesn't really fit in the series? Which one visually doesn't really fit? If you guessed this one here, freedom of religion, ding ding ding, you win the prize, because this picture is Norman Rockwell sort of going back to the drawing board. He knew he wanted to include people of different colors in this picture, and he thought that he would be able to get it by the editors of the Saturday Evening Post with this high-minded ideal here: freedom of religion. Everybody in America can, worship as they please. So why not show people with, of different faiths and different skin tones? Norman Rockwell's original concept for this picture was something that sort of fit in a little bit better with the other pictures: brighter colors, more of a narrative. And his original concept showed people of different faiths gathering at a barbershop. And in the end, he sort of felt like he was relying a little too much on stereotypes, so he abandoned it. But you can see here, one of the figures that he was determined to include was a Black man walking into the barbershop. So this is just essentially like an abandoned sketch. So we can see here in the end, his painting for freedom of religion. We just have these really big heads, really highly detailed, hands in prayer, a compressed space where everyone is sort of looking in a similar direction. And we have figures on the margins here that have a different colored skin, and they certainly aren't in the role of servant here. So Norman Rockwell has sort of broken a few rules, but he's gotten by the editors, and he continues to do this in the 1940s into the 50s with his beloved painting. I love this painting from 1945 called Homecoming. We have this incredible scene of a young GI who's returned home after the war, to this sort of tenement neighborhood. Norman Rockwell used an actual neighborhood in Troy, New York, as his inspiration for this scene. And we have everyone just delighted to see this GI who we only see from behind. We see his family spilling out of their house, all of the neighbors peeking out of their windows and doors, over fences. And of course, I love the detail of the girlfriend who can't wait to see her honey. And then, of course, we have these boys up in the tree who are delighted to see him as well. And these boys in the tree might even remind you of that picture by Norman Rockwell's mentor of the boys on the lamppost. And of course, here we see that Norman Rockwell isn't trying to make some sort of statement about a social hierarchy. These just look like little boys who are playing. And he said that when he went to Troy, New York, and he looked at this neighborhood, it was an integrated neighborhood where white kids and Black kids were playing, and he felt like that was important to include in his picture. Somehow he got it by his editors. So this is 1945, and I want to take you on a brief tangent because the following year, something kind of incredible happens in the news, and it touches Norman Rockwell. because at the University of Vermont, and as a reminder, he's living in Vermont, there's a young woman named Crystal Malone. She's a Black woman. She's one of, I think, of about 4 Black students at the entire university. And she is invited into an all-white sorority. And the national head of that sorority is essentially outraged when she hears the story. She gets into her car from Washington, D.C., and drives right up to Vermont and says, "You can't let this Black girl be a part of this group." And so the girls in the sorority sort of lobbied with the president of the university and said, back us up here. We want Crystal Malone in our group. And he really waffled. And Crystal's story was shared in Life magazine. It became a national story, and letters started coming in to the president of the University of Vermont, people weighing in on either side. But Norman Rockwell was one of the people who felt so strongly about this story and about this issue that he put pen to paper and he wrote the president of the University of Vermont and said, "Back up those girls." Ultimately, the president of the university did not. The girls of the sorority ended up burning their charter because they felt like if Crystal Malone couldn't be a part of the group, then none of them wanted to be. And it wasn't until 2008 that that sorority apologized to Crystal Malone for the way that they treated her. So I think that that's just a really sort of interesting story that kind of gives us a little insight into how Norman Rockwell was feeling about the issues of the day. I mean, when's the last time you felt fired up enough about an issue that you put pen to paper and you wrote to someone in power, imploring them to do the right thing? So right around this time, 1946, we have Norman Rockwell is given the opportunity to create the 4th of July cover for the Saturday Evening Post. And so this is, the most patriotic cover of the year, and it's just after the end of World War II. So this is going to be patriotism on steroids, and his editor decides that he's going to paint. He's been assigned to paint the Statue of Liberty. And I bring in this image on the left just to show you that other artists had painted the Statue of Liberty several times for the Saturday Evening Post, and they basically always gave a sort of a straightforward rendering of the statue, devoid of people. It's just a focus on the statue itself. But with Norman Rockwell, he's always interested in telling a story. So his early sketch sort of shows people mingling at the base of the pedestal, looking up at the statue. And he ultimately abandons this concept, and he actually got in touch with the organization that ran the Statue of Liberty and said, "Do you have any photos of people cleaning it?" Because remember, photos are essential to his process. And they said, "No, we don't actually clean the statue, but we do clean the torch, and we do have photos of that." So Norman Rockwell, instead of showing us the entire sculpture, decides to focus on the torch and decides to focus on people cleaning that torch. What a striking cover this makes, too, right? Imagine somebody saying, "Paint us the Statue of Liberty for the cover of this magazine," and all you really show is her arm. So the focus here, these 5 tiny people who were cleaning the heavy leaded amber glass of the torch of the Statue of Liberty, and they're up about 300 feet off of the ground. And you really get the sense with the birds flying around here too, of just how high up they are. And you've probably noticed by now that one of the figures up there is a Black figure. And this is a figure that apparently nobody really noticed for quite some time. This picture ultimately ended up in the art collection of the White House, and was hanging in the Oval Office. And around about 10 years ago, there was a researcher who was looking really carefully at it and who noticed that Black figure and became really curious as to how and why the editors of the Saturday Evening Post allowed him to be included. So that researcher got in touch with the Norman Rockwell Museum and said, "What's the story there? How did that Black figure get included?" And I believe it was the president or the director of the museum who actually said, "Wow, he's not supposed to be there. I can't believe he was allowed. So once the White House sort of found out the historical implications of this picture, they reinstalled it. You can see here over a bust of Martin Luther King Jr. because they saw that what Norman Rockwell was doing there was trying to, make a plea for equality here in a subtle way, but in an important way. So, throughout the 1940s, you have Norman Rockwell's kind of interest and trajectory in terms of his racial sensitivity. It's not necessarily a steady track, and I think that this image in particular, it seems very problematic to me, and I always have trouble really sort of understanding what Norman Rockwell was trying to convey with this picture. It's called Boy in a Dining Car. He's on a train. It's 1946, and it's another one of Norman Rockwell's sons who's posing as this little boy who's about to order food and pay for it from his change purse. And then there's an older Black man who is looking down at the boy, waiting to take his order. So there's a lopsided power dynamic between these two figures, and it's sort of hard to understand exactly what Norman Rockwell was trying to convey with the expression on this man's face. I can read it in so many different ways. But perhaps he's just trying to point to the fact that Black men on trains, particularly Pullman porters, uh, were able to help to create the Black middle class in America because they unionized and they made great tips, and they there was this sense of autonomy there, even though when they were on the train, they were sort of the lowest rung on the social ladder. They were looking after white families' children, but they were again sort of earning a good living. So we can see that other artists from the Saturday Evening Post sort of created images in the same vein where Black men were sort of tending to white children, and the power dynamic is a little bit more clear, more explicit and specific here. But I think Norman Rockwell's picture, it I have trouble with this one, I have to say, and the expression of that Black porter. So what we're going to do is move into the last phase of Norman Rockwell's career with the Saturday Evening Post. And we'll get to this incredible image in just a moment. There's a biographical note here that I want to highlight for you. And that is in 1953, Norman Rockwell and his wife up and leave Vermont, almost like in the middle of the night, and relocate to Stockbridge, Massachusetts. And we can see the artist in his studio painting his iconic image of downtown Stockbridge, which he's, so closely associated with now. And the reason they did that was because his wife was getting mental health treatment, and this relocating got them closer to where she was getting that treatment. And at this time, Norman Rockwell was also receiving counseling or sort of psychiatric help. And one of the things that he was really struggling with at this time was he had an unfulfilled desire to do something really important with his artwork, and he didn't feel like he had gotten there yet. So that was something that he's already struggling with in the 1950s, early 1950s. So throughout this decade, he's continuing to find ways to incorporate African Americans into his pictures for the Saturday Evening Post. This picture always reminds me of the homecoming with the GI, but it's certainly much more humorous. It's called Roadblock, and we have the bulldog that has stopped the truck here, and there's like a dozen figures in the neighborhood who are all sort of leaning out of their windows and stopped to sort of laugh and gawk at this sort of ridiculous scenario. And then right there in the foreground, Norman Rockwell includes these two children, Black children, who we only see from the back. But once again, he felt like for this neighborhood, they belonged there. And I think because we see them from behind, the Saturday Evening Post sort of let it slide. But in the 1950s and into the 1960s, we see that Norman Rockwell's star is on the rise, and we see that the Saturday Evening Post is really recognizing what he brings to their brand. So here for a 1960 cover, he's referred to as America's best loved artist. And we see Norman Rockwell with his famous triple self portrait here featured on the cover. So he is their prized pony, but he is sort of ready to exit. One of his last paintings that he executes while he's there is this one called The Golden Rule. Such an incredible work. It's strikingly beautiful. And of course, it's a really diverse picture. And think of living in rural Western Massachusetts and trying to find all of these models. So this was a huge undertaking for him, and clearly something he's very committed to. And we just have the golden rule spelled out at the bottom in gold letters: "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." Seems pretty non-controversial, uncontroversial, right? Well, at the time that this was painted, there were certainly still a lot of Americans that felt like you do unto others that look like you. So this was sort of Norman Rockwell's last hurrah with the Saturday Evening Post. And he moves on from there and he says, "For 47 years, I portrayed the best of all possible worlds. Grandfathers, puppy dogs, things like that. That kind of stuff is dead now. And I think it's about time." So what does he do? He sends off $500 to the NAACP and becomes a lifetime member. And he begins a relationship with Look magazine in the early 1960s, where he is free to take on subjects that he's really passionate about. And that supposedly that therapist or counselor that he had been working with said, "Oh, you want to paint something that is an important picture, an important subject. Well, I know a counselor down in New Orleans who's working with a little girl named Ruby Bridges, and I think her story would be really compelling to you." So, of course, what we're looking at here is a depiction of 6-year-old Ruby Bridges, who is integrating an all white school in New Orleans. This picture is called "The Problem We All Live With," and it was painted in 1963 to 1964. And this small child is being escorted into school by 4 deputy U.S. marshals who, they're headless, they're anonymous, but they are in sort of this marching formation with their fists clenched. And we don't see the angry mob. We do see a racial epithet on the wall. We see KKK over here. And then, of course, we see this tomato splatter. And that red reminds our brain of blood and blood spatter. And the fact that it seems to have perhaps just missed this young girl in this pristine white dress who is out of step with the marshals and just proceeding forward seemingly unfazed. But you can only imagine what's going on in her head. This is an actual photo of Ruby Bridges being escorted out of school. And I think it's important to just note that she was greeted each day by an angry mob that was just so angry that she was attending this school. And this continued throughout the school year. They even were parading around a baby doll in a coffin, threatening her life. They the in her community, her father, Ruby Bridges' father, lost his job. The grocery store stopped selling to her mother. Her grandparents, who were sharecroppers, lost their land. And so the entire family was completely alienated so that this young girl could attend this school, which was a real act of bravery. Now, let me give you a sense in terms of how people responded to Norman Rockwell's image in Look magazine. Here's a letter that says, "Dear Mr. Rockwell, I've never written to a national figure before, nor do I intend to make a habit of it now. Allow me to say that I have never been so deeply moved by any picture as by your painting in the current issue of Look magazine. Thank you for showing this white Southerner how ridiculous he looks. The truth is pretty hard until we get it from a Norman Rockwell." It's kind of amazing to think that anyone in this day and age, it's amazing to think that anyone could be so persuaded by a single image, but this is a powerful image. So let's talk about it. Norman Rockwell, of course, used photography as the source for his image. He had three models and he ended up sort of combining all of their images into this one girl. And he knew that this picture was going to be inside Look magazine, not on the cover. So he knew that there would be a gutter down the center of the image. And he knew that Ruby either had to sort of walk towards the front or towards the back. And in an early sketch, you can see he's sort of playing with the idea that she'd be at the back and sort of walking towards where someone has already thrown a tomato. And I think his solution for for putting her closer to the front and putting that tomato behind her, one sort of leaves the viewer guessing like how near of a miss that was, and then also suggests that she is eager to receive her education and sort of dutifully marching towards school in that way. So, on the 50th anniversary of the integration of Southern schools, this picture traveled to the White House and it was hung outside of the Oval Office. So, here is America's first Black president looking at this picture about the integration of Southern schools, which had only happened 50 years earlier. And the woman standing next to him is Ruby Bridges. And there's an incredible video clip of their interaction as they look at this. You can look it up on YouTube where he turns to Ruby Bridges and says, "I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you and what you did there." A pretty amazing moment. And I would argue that what makes his picture so compelling, what he's doing with this picture, is what he was doing with his pictures all along. He's able to capture that feeling of loneliness and isolation in a really powerful way. He used that talent in this case to tell the very compelling story of Ruby Bridges. So I would say that this picture is not too different from this picture here, even though this picture is about Christmas parties versus the threat of violence on the way into school. But here he's isolating a young girl. He's using colors to further sort of emotionally isolate her. We have that stark white dress up against sort of a more golden hued wall behind her, and then the gray suits and the yellow armbands. She's really kind of visually set apart from everybody else. And so Norman Rockwell is able to sort of use that distinct skill that he had in storytelling and in devising a picture to powerfully convey Ruby Bridges' story. So, in the last few minutes that we have, I just want to show you how he continues to engage with the subject of race over the 1960s. This is a picture called Southern Justice that he did for Look magazine. This is from 1965. He was really, really interested in this one story of three civil rights workers that were murdered by a mob in Mississippi, and the mob was led by a local sheriff. So we can see in an early sketch, the civil rights workers are staring down that sheriff and the mob. And in the final work, we can only see the mob's shadows. Just to show you Norman Rockwell's full commitment to creating these images. These are his models in his studio, and here's Norman Rockwell himself wearing the white shirt that would be a part of that picture. He got a special dispensation to use human blood to create that effect on the shirt there. He also created an illustration to go along with a Shriver article entitled "How Goes the War on Poverty?" This is from 1965 as well, also in Look magazine. And we can see here Norman Rockwell's image is one that includes the faces of a really diverse array of Americans. And then finally, I would call this sort of uh, the uh, the end, or probably the nice sort of bookend to his series of more socially conscious images from the 1960s. And this is a picture called New Kids on the Block from 1967. And this is another masterwork, I have to say. So, of course, what we're looking at here is the integration of a white neighborhood. So, it's moving day, and this Black family has just arrived. The moving truck is here. Their possessions are still on the front lawn. And coming up the driveway are these three white children. And coming down the driveway are these two Black children. And Norman Rockwell has very sort of masterfully depicted the children leaning forward and leaning backwards, sort of showing an interest, showing a distrust or a skepticism of the other. He's even included a cat and a dog, sort of suggesting that these two groups might sort of fight like cats and dogs. Even the animals are kind of color coded, but sort of reversed, with a black dog with white children, white cat with black children. But in the end, Norman Rockwell reassures us that everything is going to be just fine. And you may have already figured out how he does that. He's got a baseball glove, and he's got a baseball glove, and he's even wearing a baseball uniform. So you know that in a few minutes, all these kids will be playing catch on the front lawn. And this is just that sort of tense moment where you are sizing up someone who is totally different from you. It's a universal feeling, whether it's someone who is a different race from you, or just someone who's different from you in general. There's a moment where you look at each other and you think, well, we couldn't possibly have anything in common. And then you get past that, hopefully, and you find, numerous points of connection. So this is a tense moment, though, of course. And Norman Rockwell even included a little nosy neighbor up here, who's checking out how everything's about to unfold. So here are Norman Rockwell's photographs with his child models and even the dog. Here is a mural in New Orleans where the artist has sort of inverted the story and made it white children integrating a black neighborhood, and has given them all soccer balls in this case. And then with this picture, I would argue what Norman Rockwell is doing, and doing so well, instead of showing us loneliness and isolation, he's using that skill that he has to create a picture that makes us all feel like we are part of something, make us all feel like we're Americans. Because if you're Black or if you're white, when you're looking at this picture, there's a sense of, oh, I've been there before. I know this feeling, or this has happened to me. And so there's that sense of universal experience that he's conveying here in a really powerful way, and probably universal American experience too, I should add. This is a picture of Norman Rockwell after he painted this picture. He was 70 years old at the time. And I love the look in the photograph, because the way he's looking, I mean, it's just so defiant. And I really get the feeling that he's getting radical in his old age. One of the last radical pictures he painted is this one here, which is called The Right to Know, also for Look Magazine, 1968. And it's people staring down the seat of government, coming to their elected officials and demanding answers on, things related to the Vietnam War, among other things, but also on issues of race and equality. And so, I mean, look at how diverse this America is that he has painted. And of course, he's included himself over here on the right. And I just love that he's standing next to the hippies too. So just to wrap things up, the final word, here what we see is Norman Rockwell in a self-portrait for American Artist magazine, their 4th of July cover in 1976. So it's the bicentennial. Norman Rockwell depicts himself next to a real sort of human-sized American icon, which is the Liberty Bell. And I think the Liberty Bell encapsulates the way he thinks of America, in that he loves America, but he can see its flaws, and he loves it in spite of those flaws. And I think he um, was even trying to kind of heal some of them along the way. The following years, when he's awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and the year after that, he passes away. So in early 1979, all of a sudden he is the Saturday Evening Post's kind of beloved uh, artist once again. So we have this cover in loving memory of Norman Rockwell, and he's celebrated by the magazine, even though there had been a split, almost 2 decades earlier. So just to wrap up, what's been very interesting in the art world in the past few years is that there are a number of artists who are going back to Norman Rockwell's iconic images and recreating them, but recasting them with a more diverse set of individuals, a set of individuals that I think more accurately reflect all of America. And just to give you a sense, here's another artist who's doing the same thing. Eric Goddessman is his name. And to the sort of nice hopeful note that I'll end on is that I think Norman Rockwell, were he alive today, I think he would love these reinterpretations of his work, because knowing what we know now, had he had the opportunity to include all of these people back in the 1940s and 50s, I think he would have. So I will end there. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to use the Q&A at the top or the chat function. And I see Daisy wrote, I wonder what the purpose was for the Saturday Evening Post to even have a Black mammy on its cover. What was the message for that issue? That's a really good question. To me, the immediate thought that I have is just to reinforce a social hierarchy. And in some ways, that's just so hard for us to even imagine. But when you continually cast a certain type of person as a certain type of character, I'm even always reminded for some reason of, like, just after 9/11, there were all of these actors um, that were Middle Eastern who said that they could only get acting jobs as terrorists. So it's this idea that we have a really sort of narrow and specific idea of a certain kind of person. And in order to kind of perpetuate that, you do have to represent it. So it seems almost counterintuitive, right? It's like, if you think so poorly of someone, why put them on a magazine cover? But I guess there's a utility in reinforcing the status there. So that's a very interesting question, Daisy, and I'm glad you posed it. Thank you, Michelle, for your nice message. And let me just see in the chat here. They are all men trying to sway that one woman. Going back to the jury picture that we started with. Such a great picture. I encourage you all to download Norman Rockwell's holdout picture, or the jury picture, and just have a great discussion with your friends and family about it, because the more you look at it, the more you'll see, and they just sort of delight in the details there and in the storytelling. And if by any chance any of you have the inkling of wanting to share some of tonight's content with friends or family, because I feel like there's something about Norman Rockwell that makes talking about race a little bit easier, particularly for people who aren't really comfortable doing it. I think that there's something about Rockwell, and perhaps even this program, that sort of softens it. And so like I said at the beginning, this program is being recorded and will be shared, and I deliver this program to audiences virtually on a fairly regular basis. So you can also go to my website, iamculturallycurious.com, and find out when the next one is if you look up the calendar. So if there aren't any other questions, we'll end there for tonight. And if anything occurs to you in the future, feel free to reach out to me on my website. I would love to hear from you. And thank you again for sharing your evening with me. I am honored that you did. Oh, somebody raised their hand. Let's see if I can figure out how to figure how to call on you. Okay. Feel free to write something in the chat here, or maybe I can even unmute you. Let's see. Allow to talk. Go ahead. Let's see. Immacula, I'm sorry. I'm asking you to unmute, but I'm not sure if that's working. If you'd like to, you could type up a question. Oh, and I do see another message from Daisy that says, have you seen the Ruby Bridges with Kamala Harris in the shadow? I should have included that image. It was something like Rosa Parks sat so that Ruby could walk and then Kamala could run, which is so great. And of course, it calls on Norman Rockwell's image of Ruby Bridges in that. It's like a viral meme at this point, but that should definitely be in here. I'm glad you mentioned it. Absolutely. All right. Okay. Well, thank you again, everyone. Immacula, I'm sorry I didn't get to unmute you here, but feel free to reach out at any point. And thank you again, everybody. Have a great night and take good care.